My name is Adeline, and if you've ever found yourself in the self-help aisle of a bookstore, there's a good chance you've read my words. You just wouldn't know it. For 7 years, my name was a secret, my voice was a ghost, and my job was to be the architect behind the man on the cover, Julian Croft. The motivational guru whose platitudes about authenticity and owning your story sold millions of copies. I wrote every single one of them. And after he fired me, he told me that my writing, my voice, my soul poured onto the page was replaceable. He was wrong. And this is the story of how I proved it. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or had your work stolen, I need you to do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe, because it helps to know I'm not just screaming into the void. It helps to know I'm not alone. The end came not with a bang, but with a sterile, condescending video call on a Tuesday afternoon. Julian's face was pixelated, framed by the ridiculously pristine white bookshelf in his home office. It was a set, of course. I knew because I had helped him choose the books, arranging them by spine color for maximum aesthetic appeal on his Instagram feed. Most of them were still in their shrink wrap. He was talking about the final draft of his 4th book, The Apex Principle. My 4th book. He was smiling that predatory, bleached veneer smile he used when he was about to deliver a verdict he thought was magnanimous. He said, "Adeline, this is brilliant work, truly. The way you've captured my voice is, as always, uncanny." He paused, letting the compliment hang in the air like cheap perfume. I waited. I'd learned that with Julian, the silence after a compliment was always a preamble to a gut punch. "There's just one small thing," he continued, his smile tightening fractionally. Page 21. The sentence about cognitive dissonance. It feels a little academic, a little cold. It doesn't sound like me. My heart did a slow, familiar drumbeat of frustration. The sentence was the cornerstone of the entire chapter. It was the linchpin that connected his vague, ethereal concepts of vibrational alignment to a tangible psychological principle. It was the very sentence that gave the chapter its intellectual credibility. It was the sentence I had spent 3 days coaxing out of 6 hours of his rambling, incoherent audio notes. I said calmly, "Julian, that sentence is the argument. Without it, the chapter is just a collection of nice-sounding words. It's what gives the idea teeth." His smile vanished. The shift was instantaneous. The warm, charismatic guru was gone, replaced by the cold, ruthless CEO who saw people as assets to be managed or discarded. A chill went through the screen. His voice dropped. "Adeline," he said, "the brand is about accessibility. It's about feeling, not thinking. You've been with me a long time. You should know that." I should know that my job was to make him sound smart, but not so smart that it revealed he wasn't the one thinking the thoughts. I pushed back, just a little. It was a mistake. I know that now. My loyalty had bred a foolish, misplaced sense of partnership. I said, "With respect, Julian, your audience is getting more sophisticated. They're ready for this. It shows respect for their intelligence." He laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. He said, "I'll be the judge of what my audience is ready for. It's my name on the book. It's my face on the tour. It's my brand." Then came the words that would echo in my head for weeks. The words that became the fuel. "Frankly, I'm a little disappointed you're being so precious about this. Maybe you're too close to it. Maybe we need a fresh perspective." He leaned into his camera, his eyes like chips of ice. "You know your writing is good, Adeline. It is, but it's replaceable." Replaceable. The word didn't just land, it detonated. 7 years of my life. 7 years of deciphering his verbal spaghetti, of staying up until 3 in the morning to meet impossible deadlines, of canceling my own vacations because he had a sudden inspirational flash on a yacht in Monaco and needed me to turn it into a keynote by sunrise. 7 years of sitting in the back of sold-out auditoriums, watching him get standing ovations for my sentences, my stories, my soul, all of it, erased in a single careless breath. He must have seen the flicker of shock on my face because his tone softened into that false, cloying sympathy again. He said, "Look, I think we've just come to the end of our road together. It's been a great run, but all things must evolve. My assistant will send over the final paperwork and your last payment. I wish you nothing but the best." And with that, the screen went black. No thank you. No real goodbye. Just a digital execution. I sat there staring at my own reflection in the dark monitor. Replaceable. The word was a brand on my mind. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of my laptop and the frantic, panicked thumping of my own heart. I felt a strange, cold calm descend. It was the kind of calm that comes after the lightning strike, right before the thunder rolls. He thought he had fired his ghostwriter. He had no idea he had just created a ghost who was about to start haunting him. He had forgotten about the one thing I wasn't willing to replace, the truth. And I had hundreds of hours of it, saved on a hard drive, waiting for a first draft. The silence in my apartment that night was a physical presence. It was heavier than air, thick with the ghosts of 7 years of one-sided conversations. My laptop sat on the coffee table, a sleek black tombstone marking the death of my career, or at least the one I had known, the one that paid the bills, the one that allowed me to pretend I was part of something meaningful, even if my name was nowhere on it. I didn't cry. Not at first. The shock had frozen my emotions into a solid, brittle block of ice in my chest. I just sat on my sofa, the city lights of some other, more vibrant world twinkling outside my window. I thought about the word, replaceable. It wasn't just an insult, it was an erasure. Julian hadn't just fired an employee. He had declared that the very core of my contribution, the unique alchemy of turning his chaotic thoughts into structured, resonant prose, was a generic commodity. Something you could pick up off a shelf, like a can of soup. My gaze drifted to the bookshelf against my wall. It was crammed with books, my real books, not the glossy mass-market hardcovers with Julian's face on them, but the worn paperbacks I'd had since college, the masters of the craft. I saw my father in them. He was a journalist, old school, a man who believed in bylines and facts and the unassailable truth of a primary source. He spent 40 years at a city newspaper, his name printed in stark black ink above stories that, more than once, had shaken the foundations of powerful people. He taught me that words had weight, that they were architecture, building worlds or tearing them down. He was the reason I became a writer. The irony felt like swallowing glass. I was his daughter, and I had spent 7 years being a professional vessel for another man's ego, my name deliberately absent. That's when the ice in my chest finally began to crack. A single hot tear traced a path down my cheek. Then another. It wasn't a loud sobbing breakdown, it was a quiet internal collapse. The full weight of the betrayal settled on me. It wasn't just the firing. It was the years of quiet humiliations I had swallowed, rebranding them as paying my dues. My mind unspooled, a frantic film reel of memories I had consciously suppressed. Flashback. Year 2, we were in a hotel conference room in Chicago, prepping for a massive keynote speech. Julian was pacing, sweating through his custom-tailored shirt, because the CEO of the company that had hired him had asked a pointed question about supply chain ethics in their pre-briefing, a topic Julian knew nothing about. He was panicking. He'd thrown his notes on the floor, a flurry of my carefully typed pages. He'd yelled, "This is garbage, Adeline. It's all head, no heart. Where's the story?" I had spent the next hour on my knees on the cheap, patterned carpet, talking him down like a child. I'd found a story, my story. A story about my grandfather, a factory foreman who had always treated his workers like family. I gave him the details, the smell of machine oil and cheap coffee, the sound of my grandfather's worn work boots on the concrete floor. I handed him my own history, gift-wrapped. An hour later, he was on stage, under the warm glow of the spotlights. He told the story of his grandfather, the factory foreman. He got a thunderous standing ovation. A woman in the front row was weeping. Afterward, in the green room, he'd clapped me on the shoulder, his face flushed with adrenaline and victory. He'd said, "We nailed it." He hadn't said, "You saved me." He hadn't even said thank you. He had said, "We," as if we had both been on that stage. Flashback. Year 5. The launch party for his second book, Unleash Your Resonance. My second book. It was in a swanky Manhattan loft. All exposed brick and champagne flutes. I was standing in a corner, nursing a glass of cheap Prosecco, feeling utterly invisible. Julian was holding court, surrounded by agents, publicists, and media personalities. I watched as he autographed a copy for a famous daytime talk show host. He wrote, "May you always find your truth, my truth." I had written that line. It was from a journal entry I had written after my first real heartbreak. I'd used it in the book's conclusion, thinking it was a safe, anonymous place to put a piece of myself. Seeing him write it, claiming it so casually, felt like a physical violation. It was like watching someone burgle your house and then try to sell your stolen memories back to you. I'd tried to leave, but his agent, a slick man named Marcus, had stopped me. He'd slung an arm around my shoulder, his breath smelling of gin. He'd said, "Great work on this one, kid. You really get him. You're the best damn ventriloquist in the business." He'd meant it as a compliment. A ventriloquist. I wasn't a partner. I wasn't a creator. I was a puppet master for a dummy who got to take all the bows. The humiliation was so sharp, so specific, it made me nauseous. I went home that night and wondered if my own voice even existed anymore. Had I given it all away? My mind snapped back to the present. The quiet of my apartment felt suffocating. I stood up and walked to my home office, a small nook crammed with my real life. On the desk sat an external hard drive, a boring gray box. It was my archive, my backup. Julian had always insisted we record our conversations. He called them ideation sessions. He'd ramble for hours, a stream of consciousness torrent of buzzwords, half-baked analogies, and contradictory philosophies. He found the act of talking therapeutic. My job was to listen to the recordings, pan for the few flecks of gold in the river of mud, and then build a palace from them. He was famously technophobic and disorganized. He left all the logistics to me. I managed the recordings, I stored the files. He probably didn't even know where they were. After each project, he just wanted the finished manuscript, polished and perfect, so he could read it, memorize it, and then perform it as his own. He never looked back. He only looked forward, to the next stage, the next book tour, the next ovation. In his colossal arrogance, he had forgotten about the raw material. He had forgotten about the hundreds of hours of evidence that documented his creative impotence. My hand hovered over the hard drive. It felt warm to the touch, humming with latent energy. This wasn't about revenge. I told myself that, over and over. It was a mantra to keep the uglier, more satisfying thoughts at bay. It wasn't about revenge. It was about correction. It was about attribution. It was about reclaiming the parts of my own story that I had so willingly given away. But who was I kidding? A small, dark, satisfying smile touched my lips. It felt good. It felt like steel. The phone rang, shattering the silence. I glanced at the screen. It was my sister. I knew it would be about our dad. I answered, my voice still thick with unshed emotion. "Addie," she said, her own voice tight with worry. "I just got off the phone with the nursing home. Dad had a fall." My blood ran cold. "Is he okay?" "He's okay. He's okay," she said quickly, more rattled than anything. "But the doctor wants to run some more tests, maybe another MRI. You know what that means." I knew exactly what that meant. More bills, astronomical bills that his meager journalist pension could never cover. For the past year, I had been the one covering the shortfall. My ghostwriting income, the very salary I had just lost, was the financial firewall keeping my father in a decent facility, getting the care he needed. Suddenly, this wasn't just about professional pride or existential angst, it was about survival. My father's survival. "I have to go. I'll call you back," I said, my mind racing. I hung up the phone. The abstract injustice of my firing had just become brutally, terrifyingly concrete. I was unemployed. My primary source of income was gone, and my father, the man whose integrity I had compromised for a paycheck, was vulnerable. I sank into my office chair, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I felt a surge of panic, a real physical wave of it that made the room swim. What was I going to do? I could look for another ghostwriting gig, but that could take months. The industry was small, incestuous. News of my firing by a star like Julian Croft would travel fast. I might be seen as difficult, or worse, disposable. My eyes landed on the hard drive again, that boring gray box. It wasn't just an archive anymore, it was a life raft, it was a weapon, it was a business plan. I remembered something my dad had told me once, when I was complaining about a college professor I thought was unfair. He'd looked at me over his reading glasses, his eyes sharp and clear. He'd said, "Adeline, don't argue with them. Don't try to convince them, just publish the truth. The truth has a weight all its own. It doesn't need you to defend it, it just needs you to release it." The panic subsided, replaced by a cold, electrifying clarity. My resolve, which had been a flickering ember of personal pride, now roared into a furnace, stoked by filial duty and financial desperation. Julian had told me my writing was replaceable. He had forgotten that he was the one on tape, struggling to form a coherent sentence. He had forgotten that I was the one who could not only write the book, but could also document its creation. It wasn't about revenge. I whispered the words to myself in the dark. It wasn't. It was about taking my father's advice. It was about publishing the truth, and my podcast would be the byline. A byline 7 years in the making. The idea for the first draft was born in that moment, not as a petty act of retaliation, but as an act of profound and necessary creation. I was going to build something of my own, with my own name on it, using the very rubble of the life he had tried to demolish. The days that followed were a blur of frantic, focused activity. The grief and shock of being fired were still there, a low humming frequency beneath the surface, but they were drowned out by the roar of my new purpose. I had spent 7 years in the shadows, building another man's empire. Now I was going to build my own, and I was going to do it in the full, unforgiving light of day. The first step was triage. I plugged in the gray hard drive. The computer whirred as it mounted the disk, and a folder popped up on my screen. J.C. Miner's Master Audio. Inside, a cascade of subfolders, neatly labeled by year, then by book project, then by date. 7 years of my life organized with the meticulous precision of a librarian. I clicked on the most recent folder, Apex Principle. There were dozens of files. Each one was a raw, unedited WAV file, sometimes hours long. I put on my best noise-canceling headphones, closed my eyes, and double-clicked on a random file from a few months ago. Julian's voice filled my ears, not the smooth, confident baritone he used on stage, but his real voice. It was hesitant, reedy, laced with vocal tics. He'd say, and you know, and like in a constant looping rhythm. "So the apex, it's about It's a feeling. It's like when you're standing on a mountain and you can see everything, the clarity. It's a vibrational, a synergy of potentiality. People need to feel that. They need to plug into their own apex. It was word salad. A meaningless jumble of new age jargon and half-formed metaphors. Then I heard my own voice cut in, calm and measured. My voice on the tape said, "Okay, Julian. So the mountaintop is a metaphor for a moment of profound clarity. What if we frame that not as a location, but as a state of mind? What if the apex principle is a teachable mental model for achieving that clarity, even when you're not on a literal mountain? What if it's about creating your own vantage point?" A long pause on the tape. Then Julian, his voice suddenly energized, latching onto my words. "Yes, that's it. A mental model. A vantage point. That's brilliant, Adeline. Write that down." I took off the headphones, my heart pounding. It was all there. The before and the after. The raw clay and the finished sculpture. The chaos and the order. It was irrefutable. I had the blueprints, I had the construction footage, I had the receipts. For 7 years, I had been his translator, his editor, his intellectual engine, and now the entire world was going to see the factory floor. My next call was to Chloe. Chloe and I had been friends since college, where we'd bonded over a shared love for obscure documentaries and a shared disdain for our pretentious film studies professor. While I had chased the literary life, she had gone into the technical side of sound. She was now a freelance audio engineer and podcast producer, the kind of person who could hear the difference between a condenser and a dynamic microphone from across a room. I met her at a small, divey coffee shop that smelled of burnt espresso and desperation. I put my laptop on the rickety table between us. I told her everything. The firing, the replaceable comment, the recordings, the idea. When I was finished, she was silent for a long moment, stirring her latte with a thoughtful expression. She looked up at me, her eyes serious. "Addie," she said, "this is dynamite. Are you sure you want to do this? This isn't just burning a bridge. This is salting the earth where the bridge used to be. He'll come after you. Lawyers, cease and desists, the works." "I know," I said, and my voice didn't waver. "But he won't win." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "How can you be so sure? The laws around this stuff can be tricky. He could argue you recorded him under false pretenses." "That's where the beauty of it lies," I explained, leaning forward. My confidence was growing with every word. I never recorded him. He recorded us. It was his edict, for his process, and he gave me the files for a specific purpose, to turn them into his books. All I'm doing is showing people that process. I'm not leaking confidential information. I'm providing commentary on a creative work. It's a masterclass in ghostwriting. It falls into a very interesting gray area of fair use and transformative work. It's a debatable point legally, but the court of public opinion moves faster than the legal system. Chloe's expression shifted from concern to a slow, growing grin. She was a technician, but she was also an artist. She understood the power of a good story. "So he consented to the recording, and you're using it for the exact purpose it was created for, to document the making of his books. You're just making that documentation public," she mused. "That's deliciously, diabolically clever. I'm in." That was the moment the plan became real. It moved from a vengeful fantasy in my head to a tangible project with a partner. Chloe became my co-conspirator, my technical guru, my loyal ally. We spent the next 2 weeks in a state of feverish creation. We turned my small apartment into a makeshift war room. My dining table was covered in laptops, microphones, and storyboards. Chloe handled the tech. She taught me how to use professional audio editing software, how to clean up the raw audio, how to mix my narration with the archival tape. She insisted on quality. "If we're going to do this," she'd said, "it can't sound amateurish. The production value has to be as professional and merciless as the content." Meanwhile, I became the archivist and the architect of the narrative. I spent hundreds of hours listening back to the tapes. It was an emotionally grueling process. I was reliving every moment of condescension, every stolen idea, every instance of being rendered invisible. But with each hour I listened, my resolve hardened. I wasn't just hearing Julian's intellectual vacuity, I was hearing my own competence. I was hearing the quiet, steady hand that had guided the ship through every storm. I started building the episodes. Each one would focus on a single, core concept from one of Julian's books. I'd start with his initial, rambling, often nonsensical audio. Then I'd cut to my voice, breaking it down, workshopping it, showing the listener the first draft of the idea as it was being born. For example, I took the central metaphor from his first bestseller, The Quantum Leap. He claimed the idea came to him in a dream. The tapes told a different story. "On the tape," Julian said, "it's like you want to get to the next level, but you're stuck. It's like you're on one side of a canyon and your success is on the other. How do you get there? You can't just walk. You have to quantum. You have to leap it." My voice on the tape, patient, gentle. "A quantum leap, Julian? That's an interesting phrase. In physics, a quantum leap is the instantaneous jump of an electron from one energy level to another, without ever visiting the space in between." Julian, excited, "Yes, that's it. No space in between. You just appear there. People feel like they're stuck in the in-between. We tell them they don't have to be." My voice, "So the book isn't about the hard incremental work of building a bridge across the canyon. It's about the psychological shift that allows you to believe you can simply appear on the other side. It's about mindset, not mechanics." Julian, exactly. Mindset, not mechanics. Adeline, you're a genius. That's the subtitle. The Quantum Leap Mindset, Not Mechanics. Listening to it now, years later, I felt a strange mix of pride and rage. The pride was for the work. I was good at this. I could see the structure in the chaos. The rage was for the fact that I had allowed my genius to be credited to him. While Chloe and I built the podcast, I was also building the business. I used a portion of my meager savings to file the paperwork for an LLC, First Draft Media. I bought the domain name. I created a simple, elegant logo, just the name, The First Draft, in a clean serif font with a small, subtle drawing of a ghost. It was my private joke. The subplot of my life, my father's health, was a constant humming pressure. Every other day there was another call from my sister, another update about a new specialist, another coded conversation about money. The severance package Julian had given me was a pittance, enough to cover maybe 2 months of my father's care. The fear was a powerful motivator. It kept me working 18-hour days. It made me ruthless in my editing. There was no time for self-doubt. Failure was not an option. One evening, my dad called me. His voice was frail, but the old journalist spark was still there. He said, "So your sister tells me you've left the charlatan." I smiled. "Yes, Dad. I've left the charlatan." "Good," he said. "A man who sells his own signature shouldn't be trusted." "What's next for you, Addie? You going to get a real job, put your own name on something?" His words, meant to be a gentle ribbing, landed with the force of a prophecy. I took a deep breath. "Actually, Dad, I am. I'm starting a podcast." "A podcast," he grumbled. "Everybody has a podcast. What's it about? True crime? Politics?" "It's about writing," I said carefully. "It's about how ideas are really made." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could picture him in his small room, looking out the window, the gears of his old investigative mind turning. A byline, he said finally. You're finally writing your own byline. Good for you, kid. It's about time. Hanging up, I felt a profound sense of peace. My two worlds, the secret life I'd been living and the values my father had instilled in me, were finally converging. This project was no longer just about me. It was about honoring his legacy of truth-telling. It was about earning the byline he always knew I deserved. 2 weeks after the idea was born, we were ready. We had 3 episodes fully produced, a simple website, and a launch schedule. Chloe had set up the RSS feed and distributed it to all the major podcasting platforms. Everything was quiet. Everything was in place. The digital stage was set. It wasn't about revenge. It was about creating a primary source. It was about the truth. But as I sat there, my finger hovering over the publish button for the first episode, a sliver of cold, hard, satisfying malice crept in. He had called my work replaceable. I was about to prove that his entire persona was built on my work, and a structure with a faulty foundation cannot stand for long. I clicked the button. The first draft was now public. The first 24 hours were silent, eerily so. I must have refreshed my podcast hosting dashboard 100 times. A few dozen downloads, probably just me, Chloe, and my sister. The silence was a breeding ground for doubt. Had I miscalculated? Was this a terrible career-ending mistake that no one would even notice? Was I just screaming into the void after all? I paced my apartment, the adrenaline of the launch giving way to a gnawing anxiety. I had bet everything on this. My savings, my professional reputation, my future. The weight of my father's medical bills felt like a physical stone in my stomach. Chloe, ever the voice of reason, called me. She said, "Relax, Addie. This isn't a blockbuster movie. It's a sleeper hit. It needs to find its people. The right people. Give it a minute." She was right. I forced myself to step away from the computer, to breathe. I tried to remind myself of the core principle. I was telling the truth. The outcome was not in my control. The first ripple appeared on the morning of the 3rd day. It came in the form of an email from a name I didn't recognize. The subject line was just, "Wow." The email read, "I'm a ghostwriter for a well-known business CEO. I just listened to your first episode of the first draft. I had to pull my car over because I was shaking. Thank you. I feel seen." I read the email 3 times. A warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the cold anxiety. One person. It had reached one person. That was enough. But it wasn't just one person. Later that day, another email arrived, then another. They were from editors, copywriters, personal assistants, other ghostwriters, the invisible people, the architects in the shadows. My story was their story. My vindication was their fantasy. I hadn't just launched a podcast. I had lit a beacon for an entire tribe of unsung creative professionals. The spark caught fire on day 4. A popular and notoriously sharp-tongued publishing industry blogger, a woman named Elaine Vance, whose newsletter was considered required reading for everyone in the business, wrote a post about the show. The headline was, "The Ghost in the Machine Finally Speaks." Elaine wrote, "For years we've all suspected that the polished, accessible wisdom of motivational megastar Julian Croft was perhaps a little too polished, a little too accessible. A new podcast, The First Draft, provides the devastating, compelling, and frankly hilarious answer. Hosted by his ghostwriter of 7 years, Adeline, the show is a masterclass in controlled demolition. It peels back the curtain not with malice, but with the cold, hard evidence of audio recordings. We hear Croft, in his own words, stumbling through half-formed ideas, only to be rescued by the calm, intelligent guidance of the woman he so carelessly discarded. This isn't just gossip, it's a profound commentary on creative labor, intellectual property, and the nature of authenticity in the influencer age. It is the most electrifying thing I have heard all year. Listen to it now. The effect was instantaneous. My download numbers, which had been in the low hundreds, exploded. 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. My phone started buzzing with social media notifications. My email inbox flooded. The first draft shot up the podcast charts, landing in the new and noteworthy section. We were no longer a secret. We were a story. The first sign of panic from Julian's camp came via a text from a trusted source. It was from a junior editor at his publishing house, a young woman named Sarah, whom I had always treated with kindness and respect. We'd bonded over our shared love for a particular fantasy series, a small human connection in a world of corporate artifice. Her text was short and frantic. All hell has broken loose here. Julian is on a rampage. Everyone is listening to it. Lawyers are being called. I felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. It was working. The silent, strategic move had landed exactly as intended. The noise was starting on his end, while I remained in my quiet, controlled apartment. The second episode dropped right on schedule. It was the one about the quantum leap metaphor. The one where he literally told me I was a genius for handing him his own book's subtitle. The contrast between his rambling and my clarifying questions was even more stark than in the first episode. It was undeniable. That afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID was a private number. I knew who it was. My finger hovered over the decline button. Chloe had advised me not to engage, to let the podcast do the talking. I followed her advice. I hit decline. Immediately, a voicemail notification popped up. I listened to it on speaker. Chloe and I huddled over the phone like it was a campfire. Julian's voice was tight, strained, a furious whisper. "Adeline, you need to call me, now. Take it down, take it all down. This is a violation. It's illegal. You have no idea the trouble you are in. Take it down and we can talk about a financial settlement, a generous one. Just take it down before you ruin everything." He wasn't talking about ruining my life. He was talking about ruining his. Chloe looked at me, her eyes wide. "A financial settlement. He's already offering to pay you off. He's terrified." I just smiled. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about the truth. And the truth, it turned out, was priceless. And it was getting more valuable by the hour. His threats were empty, and he knew it. My Lantoyan accuracy strategy, as discussed with Chloe, was working perfectly. The online comments were a firestorm of debate. Some self-proclaimed legal experts claimed I was breaking privacy laws. Others, citing fair use and transformative work, defended me. The debate itself was the point. It created a fog of war, a cloud of uncertainty around his legal position that made any immediate court action risky and slow. While they debated, my audience grew. The narrative was taking root, becoming fact in the court of public opinion. I didn't call him back. I didn't respond. I just went back to work, editing episode 3. The silence from my end was, I knew, more terrifying to him than any angry retort could ever be. He was used to dealing with noise, with arguments, with negotiations. He had no idea how to fight a ghost. He didn't understand that his power came from the noise he made, the spotlight he commanded. My power was the opposite. It was in the silence, the evidence, and the calm, steady release of a truth he had long since forgotten. He was panicking. I was just getting started. The podcast had become a phenomenon. What started as a niche industry whisper had erupted into a full-blown cultural conversation. Major news outlets began to pick up the story, framing it as a David and Goliath tale for the digital age. Forbes wrote a piece on the ethics of ghostwriting. The New York Times did a trend piece on the rise of the professional truth teller. My name, Adeline, once a secret, was now in headlines. Julian's name, once a beacon of inspiration, was now synonymous with fraud. The power shift was palpable. It was no longer my word against his. It was his own words on tape for the entire world to hear against the polished fiction he had sold them. The client exodus began quietly at first. My insider, Sarah, the junior editor, sent me a discreet email. A major tech company, one that had booked Julian for a $500,000 series of leadership seminars, had put their contract under review. The official reason was a scheduling conflict. The real reason was humming on every podcast platform in the world. Then the cancellations became a flood. A banking conglomerate pulled him from their annual conference, a women's empowerment summit, for which he was ironically the keynote speaker, replaced him with an actual woman. The dominoes were falling, and they were falling fast. The brand he had so carefully constructed, the brand he had accused me of not understanding, was becoming radioactive. His core product wasn't his books or his speeches, it was his perceived authenticity, and I had just proven it was a counterfeit. The most significant blow came from an unexpected quarter. A man named Arthur Vance, a titan in the private equity world and Elaine Vance's notoriously media-shy husband, had been a huge fan of Julian's. His firm had hired Julian multiple times. Arthur was the external validator I never knew I had. He sent me an email directly. It was brief and to the point. Miss Adeline, my wife was right about your podcast. I've listened to every episode. Your integrity and talent are self-evident. The work you did for Mr. Croft was the only reason we ever hired him. He is a shell. You are the substance. If you ever decide to consult independently, my door is open. I stared at the email, my breath catching in my throat. This was more than just validation. This was a bridge to a new life. A life where I wasn't the ghost, but the main attraction. Meanwhile, Julian was spiraling. His public silence was deafening, but behind the scenes, his panic was escalating. He made his desperate countermove a week after the third episode, The Authenticity Paradox, went live. An email landed in my inbox. The sender was Julian. The subject, "Let's fix this." The email was a masterpiece of narcissistic desperation. It was a rambling, emotional, and deeply revealing document. He started with flattery, calling me a brilliant writer, a true partner, the finest mind he had ever worked with. He apologized for his careless words, blaming them on the stress of the book launch. Then came the offers. He offered me my old job back at triple the salary. He offered me a co-author credit on the Apex Principle and all future books. He offered me a public apology and a press release celebrating our long and fruitful partnership. Finally came the raw, desperate plea, a 7-figure check. "Name your price, Adeline," he wrote. "Whatever it is, just make this go away. You're destroying me. This isn't you. You're better than this. This is just about revenge." That phrase again. It wasn't about revenge. I had told myself that so many times it had almost become true. But reading his email, seeing his empire crumble, feeling the cold, hard satisfaction of his panic, I had to admit a small part of it was about revenge, and it was glorious. But his offer was a trap, and I knew it. Accepting his money would invalidate my entire premise. It would reframe my actions as a shakedown, not a reclamation. It would make me just another disgruntled employee who wanted a bigger piece of the pie. It would reduce my quest for truth to a negotiation. I was building a brand of my own, a brand built on integrity and authorship. Taking his blood money would be the first and last betrayal of that brand. I forwarded the email to Chloe with a single line, "Look at this." Her reply was instantaneous. The desperate final act of a dying king. "What are you going to do?" I thought about it for a long time. I thought about my father's mounting bills. The seven-figure offer was a temptation, a siren song of immediate security. It could solve all my problems in an instant. It was the logical choice, the safe choice. But my choices had stopped being logical the day he told me I was replaceable. My actions were now guided by an emotional truth that was far more powerful. This was about finally drawing a line. It was about proving that some things, authorship, integrity, self-respect, were not for sale. It was a debatable choice from a purely financial perspective. A foolish one, maybe, but it felt like the only choice I could possibly make. I replied to Julian. My email was very short. "No, thank you, Julian. It's not for sale." I hit send, and for the first time I felt truly free. He had offered me a fortune to put the ghost back in the bottle, but I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a voice, and it was a voice he could no longer afford. The power had shifted, completely and irreversibly. He was the one who was now replaceable. A few days after I rejected his offer, I received an official-looking email from his lawyer. It was a cease and desist letter, thick with legal jargon, threatening injunctions, lawsuits for defamation, tortious interference, and a host of other terrifying-sounding claims. It was the desperate, predictable death rattle of a man with no other moves to make. I forwarded it to a pro bono media lawyer Chloe had connected me with. Her response was quick and reassuring. Standard bluster. "They have no real case, especially since you haven't made a dime from this yet and are framing it as commentary. His bigger problem is discovery. The last thing he wants is for us to legally compel him to turn over his own emails and documents. He'd be proving our case for us. Ignore it. Keep going." So I did. Episode 4 dropped, then episode 5. The audience was growing exponentially. A production company had called about optioning the story for a documentary series, my own story, with my name on it. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Julian finally requested the one thing I knew he would have to, a face-to-face meeting, or rather a face-to-face video call. He didn't want to fix things anymore. He wanted to plead his case, man to man. Or in this case, man to the woman who held his entire life in her hands. I agreed. It was time for the final confrontation. I set up the call in my small home office. I wore a simple black sweater. I made sure the lighting was clean and direct. Chloe was in the room with me, just off camera, for moral support. When his face appeared on the screen, I was genuinely shocked. The man on the other side of the call was not the polished, confident guru I had known. He looked diminished. His skin was pale and waxy. There were dark circles under his eyes. His signature expensive shirt looked rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. The pristine white bookshelf behind him was gone, replaced by a drab blank wall. He looked like a king in exile. He started without preamble, his voice hoarse. "Adeline, why are you doing this to me?" I remained silent, letting the question hang in the air. My composure, my silence, was my greatest weapon. He was used to commanding a room, to filling the space with his voice. My refusal to speak unnerved him. He tried again, forcing a pained smile. "Look, I know I messed up. I was a fool. I was arrogant. I said a stupid thing. But this is a public execution. 7 years, Addie. We had 7 good years. We built something incredible together. Are you just going to throw that all away?" I finally spoke, my voice calm and even. I said, "We didn't build it together, Julian. I built it. You decorated it, and you didn't throw it away. You tried to throw me away. There's a difference." He flinched, as if I'd slapped him. He tried to pivot to aggression, the last refuge of a defeated man. "This is illegal, what you're doing. It's theft. Those recordings are my property. My lawyer would disagree, I said, leaning forward slightly. You consented to be recorded for the purpose of creating your books. The first draft is a podcast that documents the creation of your books. I'm simply fulfilling the original mandate with a slightly larger audience. The legal ground is debatable, but the truth isn't. He deflated. The anger vanished, replaced by a raw, pathetic desperation that was almost pitiable. Almost. Please, he whispered. Just stop. What do you want? What will it take? I'll do anything. I thought for a moment. I thought about my father. I thought about the 7 years of invisibility. I thought about the word replaceable. I looked him dead in the eye. I want you to say it, I said. Say what? He asked, confused. I want you to say that you couldn't have done it without me, I said. I want to hear you admit that my writing wasn't replaceable. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He couldn't do it. His ego, the very thing that had fueled his rise, was now the anchor that was dragging him to the bottom. Admitting his dependence on me was a fate worse than professional ruin. It was an existential annihilation. I watched the war on his face for a long, painful moment. And in that moment, I had my answer. I had my vindication. I didn't need to hear the words. Seeing his inability to say them was enough. I gave him a small, sad smile. It was a genuine one. And I delivered the final blow. I took his own words, the ones that had started this whole thing, and I handed them back to him. You know, Julian, I said softly, I've learned so much from this process. I've learned that my writing wasn't replaceable, but it turns out the person speaking it was. Then I reached forward and ended the call. The screen went black, just as it had on the day he fired me. But this time, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of my own power, my own name, my own future. A week later, Sarah, my ally at the publishing house, sent me another text. He's out. The board fired him. Morals clause. They're pulping the entire print run of Apex Principle. It was over. He hadn't been defeated by my rage or my revenge. He had been dismantled by the simple, undeniable truth of his own inadequacy. He was erased, not by me, but by the consequences of his own actions. My podcast was just the catalyst that allowed reality to reassert itself. I was thriving in my new world, a world I had built for myself. I didn't need to see his old world burn. It had simply ceased to matter. I sit here now, in my own studio. It's not a nook in my apartment anymore. It's a proper space, with soundproofed walls and professional equipment, funded by the advertising revenue from a podcast that now has millions of listeners. On the wall in front of me, I have a framed print. It's a simple, elegant design. In the center, in a stark, bold font, is a single word, replaceable. It's not a wound anymore. It's a trophy. It's a reminder that my greatest insult became my most powerful brand. My father is in a new facility, the best in the state. His care is completely covered. When I told him about the success of the podcast, about the documentary deal, about everything, he just nodded, his eyes clear. He said, "A byline is a powerful thing, Addie. It proves you were there. It proves you mattered." It wasn't about revenge. I say that to you now, and I believe it more than ever. It was about reclamation. It was about the quiet, determined act of picking up the pieces of a story someone else tried to shatter and building something stronger in its place. It was about proving that the most valuable thing you own is your own voice, your own name. This story, my story, is not unique. It's the story of anyone who has ever poured their heart and soul into something, only to be told they don't matter. It's for every assistant who runs the company while the boss takes the credit. For every engineer who perfects the product while the CEO gets the cover of the magazine. For every creative mind who has been told they are a commodity. Your work is not replaceable. Your voice is not replaceable. You are not replaceable. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like a ghost in your own life, I need you to do more than just listen. I need you to be part of this conversation. Let me know in the comments about a time you felt underestimated and how you found your strength. Like this video to help the story reach others who need to hear it, and share it with someone you know who is fighting to have their voice heard. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because the first draft is just getting started and there are so many more truths to tell. Thank you for listening.